Hello there, it's your Hanish of Whiskey Lore. Time for another whiskey tasting. San Luis Valley, that is where we are headed in Colorado for a very unique whiskey. I bought this bottle about a little over a year ago. I was coming back from doing some interviews in Los Angeles, California, driving back to the East Coast, and decided to hit some distilleries along the way. When I got to Denver, I was thinking, well, I'll probably go by Stranahan, see what it's like, or maybe by Laws. And Laws is a distillery that I learned about through my friend Israel, who has the Whiskey One channel here on YouTube. And if you haven't watched Israel, I highly recommend subscribing to his channel. He's got a great palate, and he digs out some really interesting whiskeys. Actually, last time I was in Denver, it was so funny because I was there to do a event, the Snowflake Festival with Stranahan's, and I just texted. I was like, man, I'm sort of in the area again, like New Mexico and Colorado. Yeah, they are next door to each other, but Denver and Albuquerque are quite a distance away from each other. I was like, hey, I'm in town, and it's too bad you're not here in Denver because I know how much you love Law's whiskey. And he said, I am in town. And so we actually got to meet for the first time. We had chatted so many times back and forth, and so he has a love for Scotch and also for, like I say, some very unique whiskeys. And he hits a lot of the Colorado distilleries, and I am a big fan of Colorado in terms of whiskey. Well, Laws was a distillery. That was the one I decided to go to, and I got a nice little impromptu tour. And then after the tour was over, I got to do a tasting. I thought, well, I really like to go home with a bottle because I can't find the stuff in South Carolina. And so I ended up choosing this one, which is this San Luis Valley Rye, which is called that because they actually went out and harvested this wild rye and decided to do a whiskey that is 50% malted, 50% unmalted rye. And I could have done a tasting and review of this a year ago, easily. I could have done it, but I wouldn't do it. And the reason I wouldn't do it is because I kept thinking, this whiskey is so absolutely unique, and my palate is just not ready. I have not had enough experience to do this whiskey justice because it has such unique flavor, and it's flavor that I really like, but I can't describe it. And I don't know if you've ever been through this before, that you've tasted the whiskey and you've gone, whoa, I know that note, and that's amazing, but I couldn't tell you what it is. It's that disconnect. It's like when somebody hands you an orange and then you eat it, you just expect that it's going to taste like orange. It's easily identifiable. But if somebody says, close your eyes, and then they hand you something and you taste it and it's orange, but you don't know that it's orange, it can sort of be a little bit difficult at first to try to pick out what it is. And of course, orange is probably an overly obvious thing to say. But, there are certain flavors that are just really hard to pick out and nail when you're not actually looking at the physical thing before you put it into your mouth. Black licorice, that's one of those things that I can taste it. I don't always identify it quickly in a whiskey because I'm not looking at it. And so it can be a little bit hard to draw that out. And what was happening with this whiskey was I was going, well, this smells like rye, but I it's different. It's not like any other rye whiskey I have ever nosed in my life. And so I got to figure out what is making this different from all the other rye whiskeys that I have had, and what is it that makes me really appreciate this one over other rye whiskeys that I've had. So I feel like now, believe it or not, a trip to Ireland is probably the reason why I now feel confident enough to do a tasting on this whiskey, because there's an Irish element in this whiskey, something that I picked up while I was going through Ireland that comes through on this whiskey, which really, really helps me define it a lot better for you in terms of taste and smell. So this is a straight rye whiskey. Like I say, it's 50% unmalted rye, 50% malted rye. And it is 3 years old, so it is straight. They tell you that it's a 3-year-old whiskey on the bottle. And love the packaging, by the way. I love these square bottles. This is cask strength. This one is 60.2. Barrel number 460. Part of me, I am somebody who says I'm not always a fan of cask strength whiskey because it's a little too harsh for me. I don't like adding my own water to it. I will do it, but just a couple of drops, fine. But if I have to douse the whiskey, then I feel like I'm kind of missing the experience a little bit because I'm just flooding my whiskey, basically. Well, this one, I don't want to add water to it. It is very drinkable, and I just love the smell and the experience of it. And I will add a little water here in a moment to see how things change for me. But this has a nutty, almost peanut butter rye to it, to me. There's it's herbal. It's a fresh herbal, kind of a mint kind of a character that I pull out of it. A little bit of pencil shavings that I get in there. Chocolate, a little citrus note, probably an orange. Yeah, orange. But it has this dark chocolate note also in it that I'm pulling out. Really nice, and a grain note. And it's that Irish pot still grain note that I'm pulling out, which is interesting because there's no malted barley in this. But something within that grain, that rye grain, has a very grain-like, more of a barley-like character, just kind of hiding underneath the surface. Cheers. Gonna enjoy this. On the palate, that grain note comes through even more. A little clove coming in there. A little bit of that black licorice. Oh, the grain. Again, I talk about that graham cracker note. It's there, but then there's this nice rye note that envelops it. And it's a dry note, but it's not overly dry. And it's oily. So it is just a really pleasant lay on your tongue. A little bit of a char note there that I'm pulling in there. Some dark chocolate, little leather note coming through as well. But that grain note is what really is selling me on this whiskey, and so well distilled. We're talking, this is a 3-year whiskey, so the thing about a younger whiskey is that sometimes if the distillation isn't that great, I would imagine the new make on this tastes amazing as well, because there are some barrel involved here, but I feel like they really allowed and distilled that rye. It's a quality rye. Yes, it's a wild rye, but wow, what an interesting flavor, and so different from any other rye that I've had. And like I say, I've held off on this, and I am glad I did, because it is that grain note that comes in, that graham cracker note, a little bit of a honey note that kind of adds, but it's almost like there's some burnt characteristics in here. It makes it a little bit darker, towards the end and that herbally note. It's just absolutely a pleasure to drink. And I'm going to add some water to this, and I hate to do it because I so like this the way it is. I just can't imagine how a little bit of water is going to improve this, honestly. But, 60% ABV, it's a pretty strong whiskey. So on the nose, the water, I don't know if it improved it any. And it's one of those that I'd probably let it sit in the glass for a little while. I think that's my thing about adding water, especially a substantial amount of water, is that it just doesn't have time to get mixed in there to create a consistent kind of an experience. Yeah, the nose is actually not as complex as it was when I didn't add the water to it. It's almost like it's now gone more for the nutty. And even the herbal is kind of tamped down a little bit. Still great on the palate though. Oh, you would not know this is 60 ABV. You wouldn't. I mean, it is really drinkable. Oh, and the grain note comes in. It did mute the grain note a little bit. It's probably bringing in more of a umami kind of note all of a sudden. What's interesting about this is that it has a maple note. I really had to work on this, and I kept saying, that's a maple note. No, it's not. That's a maple note. No, that's not. It is a maple note, but, and this may be hard to do, but imagine the elements of maple, but take the sweet away, right? It has the elements of that tree. It has that flavor there, but it is drier. It is not a sweet. For people who are not a fan of Canadian ryes because they're a little bit too sappy, maple sweet, this is that same maple, but it is not sweet. The sweet has been pulled away. Everything about this is a darker whiskey. This is again back to that thing where I hear people say, oh, Americans love sweet whiskey, and that's what really draws me to this whiskey is that it is not a sweet whiskey, but it's not overly dry whiskey. It's just right in a sweet spot that hits perfectly for me. Again, I could not have done this review had it not been for my trip to Ireland, had it not been for me exposing myself to different types of whiskeys and really working on my palate and trying to get a better sense of things. It's part of the reason why when I first started drinking whiskeys and people would offer me a high-priced whiskey, I would say, don't waste it on me because I'm not ready yet. And that's just respect for the whiskey. And this is where I'm at with this. There is a respect I have for this whiskey that I just didn't feel I could do it justice without actually stepping back from it and saying, okay, let me learn before I drink this. And I am so glad that I didn't empty this out on some kind of a, mindless drinking experience, because I will enjoy the rest of this very bottle of Laws. 2 thumbs up. It's not often that I just ooze about a whiskey, but this is definitely in my excellent category, and I am so glad that I decided this was the whiskey that I was going to bring home with me, and that I didn't go with the one that I'll have to taste it again and see what their regular ABV version of this is like. But man, the Cask drinks so well that very glad I got it. Have you guys had Laws whiskey before? Do you have a whiskey that you have just put on the shelf for a while until you feel like you can appreciate it even more? Or have you stopped from buying a whiskey because you're like, that's a lot of money to spend, and I know I'm not going to be able to probably get the full experience out of it until I've kind of developed the palate a bit? It's okay to admit you're not 100% there. honestly, I would not be doing these tasting videos if it weren't for the fact that I started them out saying, I really don't know how to taste. And I'm trying to learn how to do it. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you'd like to watch more of them. Give me a like if you learned anything, or if you are just intrigued by the channel, or you enjoyed the last 10 to 15 minutes that you've been sitting here watching it. Until next time, cheers and Slanjava. Colorado, wow. You guys are doing amazing work.